Thank you for joining me again, and welcome back to day 25 or 6. I believe it's 26 now. Time is flying. Of our Bible study in Matthew, we are beginning chapter 15. I'm going to try and see how far I can get. I can see there might be some things I go on tangents about, but I'm going to try and see if I can get the whole chapter in one again. So, it starts off with... Oh, this is actually a great way to describe it. I'm in the NASB right now, and it has the little title of this passage of tradition and commandment. And so, like, the Pharisees came to Jesus from Jerusalem, and they're upset. They're like, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. They're now not upset about a law being broken. They're upset about a tradition being broken. Jesus says, why do you yourselves transgress the commandment, the law of God, for the sake of your tradition? Why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? Why are you holding your tradition as more valuable than the law? For God said, honor your father and mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death. Now, full disclosure, I did read both the references for this part because it didn't make sense to me. And both the references recount the commandment as more of like, he who curses father or mother is to be put to death. Not simply speaks evil of father or mother, but he who curses father or mother. And so I'm not sure if this is just like a poorly translated spot or what exactly, but that's the context of those references. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever I have that would help you has been given to God. He is not to honor his father or his mother. That's what the Pharisees say. In that case, don't honor your father or mother. And Jesus says, and by this, you invalidated the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites. Rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you, this people honors me with their lips. What they're saying sounds good, but their heart is far away from me. And then here's the real bad, this is a intensely terrible criticism. I would hate to hear this from God. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. And I was thinking about this, and I feel like I have times where I might be guilty of a similar thought process to what the Pharisees are doing here, where they kind of like they're taking some degree of liberty in the way that they're interpreting the law. Maybe it's not to the same extent as this, but for an example, law says don't lie. It says don't bear false witness. What did Rahab the harlot do? She lied. She lied for the sake of the spies of the children of Israel. She lied for the sake of God's people, to protect God's people from the soldiers, I believe it was, who were following them and were looking to kill them, asking where they were. She lied, told them, no, they went this way, and they're really hiding inside her house. Is the way I recall that story. But the point being that she lied, and yet later, multiple times in the Bible, I believe, is at least once, but I believe it's multiple times, it's recounting her as being righteous in that action. And so here she's breaking the law and yet being counted for righteousness. And here Jesus is super upset with these people for breaking the law for the sake of their tradition. What changed? What I think changed, and the biggest difference between these Pharisees and Rahab the harlot, is the intention behind why they broke the law. Rahab, I think, had the intention because she believed in God. She believed that God was the one true God, that she needed to be on the side of him. She needed to help the children of Israel by whatever means possible, and the means that she knew was to lie. But for the Pharisees, their character, and I feel hesitant to judge their character, but from what I see in the recounting of the Pharisees' character all throughout the Gospels, is that they're very much people of outward appearance. They're people of trying to keep up the appearance of having a strong foundational worship of God, and the appearance of holiness, and the appearance of pure adherence to God's law and word. And yet they'll also look for a way to get around. Well, that's not the right way of saying it. What would I say? Like when they're upset with Jesus and they look for a way to catch him so that they can put him to death. That happens a bunch of times. They sought for a way that they could catch him in some mistake and justify murdering him because he was taking away their followers, taking away their clout, as it were, taking away their validity. And so I think the biggest difference that I can personally see inside this example here is the motivations behind why they're doing it. And this is kind of where I get the point of view that God judges us individually and on a very situational basis. Jesus says, this big thing, hear and understand, it is not what enters the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth. This defiles the man. And he actually interprets this whole thing later, but before that I'll just quickly read. His disciples come to him, they come to him. Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this statement? That it's not what enters the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth that defiles the man? They were offended. How dare you challenge our tradition? But Jesus says, every plant which my Father did not plant shall be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into a pit. Just a quick backpedal. I think it was in one of the previous chapters where Jesus makes this bold claim of, except your righteousness far exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will in no way enter heaven. And I think for the people at the time, they looked at the Pharisees as the closest thing to holy that they could ever know. And so it's like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get to heaven because they're like the closest thing to perfect I've ever seen, and I'm nowhere near them. But here Jesus is describing those people as blind guides of the blind. And if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into a pit. And that might be a reference to the something resembling hell or a lake of fire or the bottomless pit, maybe. That's intense too, if it is. And not just that, but let them alone. Leave them alone. They're making their choice. That might be following along with giving them over to a reprobate mind because they continually resist and resist and resist and resist. But let me keep moving because I'm getting high on time already. So Peter says, please explain this parable to us. And Jesus says, are you still lacking in understanding also? Do you still not know what's going on? Do you understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated? You can poop it out. But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, slanders. These are the things which defile the man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man. You might get sick, but you're not sinning. You're sinning when what comes out of your mouth is a reflection of what's inside your heart. And predominantly often what we say is coming from inside of our heart. There may be some exceptions where it's an accident, but oftentimes we say things where we put our foot in our mouth type of deal. That's something inside your heart that came out of you. You said something that probably hurt somebody, and you were probably uncomfortable with the fact that you said because you're not proud of the fact you said it, but it came from your heart. That's the type of stuff that where sin can enter. Because you're speaking it and you're having those thoughts and your heart isn't pure. Hopefully I'm explaining that halfway decently. Then we have the Syrophoenician woman. It's a mouthful. Jesus went away and withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon, super, super sinful cities. And a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed," potentially because of where they live and the religious practices they're doing. But she is cruelly demon-possessed. Jesus didn't answer her a word. I don't know why, but Jesus knows the history of this lady. He knows what she's been through. He knows everything about this woman he knows. And he doesn't treat her with the utmost kindness. He doesn't answer her a word. His disciples came and implored him, saying, "Send her away. She keeps shouting at us." So they're probably treating her with more contempt than Jesus, but he's just not answering. And Jesus says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." So maybe that doesn't even count as being unkind to her. I think I might have earlier described it as that, but maybe I'm wrong even in thinking that. He's just being quiet. I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Later, people are coming for you and your people, ma'am. I was sent only to Israel for this. I hope I didn't get Jesus recounting wrong there. Of course, Jesus is kind to everybody, but like where he says, "Let them alone," to the Pharisees, like leave them in their ignorance. There's times where his actions are more indifferent and less openly kind. And I'm sure there's wonderful reasons for that. But she came and began to bow down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." She is pursuing him diligently. And he answered and said, "It is not good to take the children's bread, Israel's bread, and throw it to the dogs." He compares her to a dog because that's the way that he is metaphorizing. Isn't a word. He's making a metaphor out of this, like the people of Tyre and Sidon are super, super sinful. Lots of pagan worship, and I believe it's Ashtoreth and Chemosh are the gods that they worship, which I think still involves like ritualized child sacrifice and ritualized prostitution, sacramental prostitution, like priestess prostitution and male priest prostitution. Lots of intensely sinful stuff. And on top of that, she's also Canaanite, which has its own set of sinful stuff too. And I can't remember who the Canaanites worshipped, if it was Molech or not, but I think that's more into even deeper child sacrifice as well. I'll spare you the details if you don't know, but you might look it up if you're interested, because it's intense. I mean, it sheds some light on just how terrible the worship of these people were. And a lot of people consider those gods as actually demons impersonating gods, and or fallen angels impersonating gods that people were worshiping. And that follows right in line with this lady crying out to Jesus about her daughter being cruelly demon possessed if she's into that worship. But she's calling out to Jesus all the same. And she says, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table." And Jesus says, "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed at once. It's almost like Jesus wasn't overly chomping at the bit to be super complimentary to her. And it's almost like she knew and understood why. Because maybe she was convicted by what's inside of her life already, and Jesus knew too. That's my best interpretation. Departing from there, Jesus went along by the Sea of Galilee, and having gone up the mountain, he was sitting there. Large crowds came to him. Those who were lamed, crippled, blind, mute, and many others laid down at his feet, and he healed them. The crowds were marveling as they saw the mute speaking, the crippled restored, the lame walking, the blind seeing, and they glorified God, the God of Israel. And then we have another big miracle, kind of like the feeding of the 5,000, was it, in the last chapter? We have a very similar situation. This time it's 4,000, and they have 7 loaves and a few small fish. I think that's overall more food than they had last time, depending on the size of the fish, more bread. Jesus says, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat, and I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might faint on the way. Disciples say, where will we get so many loaves in this desolate place to satisfy such a large crowd? I think it's one chapter back where Jesus fed the 5,000 with less food than they have right now, and yet they're still struggling in faith. Doesn't that say something? Like, and I don't even want to be judgmental to the disciples, because reflecting on my own life, there's so many times where God's pulled through and yet I still struggle in faith. But isn't that saying something? Jesus just went through this where they fed such a huge crowd on so little food and took up 12 baskets of extra. And here they had more food. So the first time they started with less food, and they ended up with more food. And now comparatively here, they have a smaller crowd. They started off with more food, and yet they took up less leftovers. 7 large baskets full, and I think the previous one was 12 baskets full. So just judging off the numbers instead of size, it's 7 versus 12 baskets full, and it's 7 loaves of bread and a few small fish, versus, I want to say it was 4 or 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish in the previous one. So hopefully I'm explaining that right. But in the first one, they have a bigger crowd, less food, and they end up taking up more leftovers in that miracle. And here they're starting off with an easier miracle, if you want to call it that. They have a smaller crowd, they have more food, and yet they take up less leftovers. It's still more leftovers than they should. They shouldn't be able to feed that amount of people with what they have, but they still take up less leftovers than in the previous example where they had a worse off scenario and took up more leftovers. God did more with less in the previous miracle than he did with this one. Just wanted to point that out. That's been chapter 15. I went over for sure, and I apologize for that. I thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe and comment any input that you have, and I appreciate it all so much. Thank you for joining me again. See you on the next one. Thanks.